one of the first things that old residents notice when they come visit the old McKinley Park neighborhood is the buildings, how a lot of them were torn down or converted. Like on the right here, there used to be a bunch of warehouses and factories. And now we have Aviator Place here, and then up on the right there's some storage place. So I'm going to drive down these streets and then through the neighborhood and check out all the things that are different in the area. What's still here and what's not. And how, if I could see any crime, because I hear the crime is up, and that's why a lot of people are moving out. Right? It looks like an interesting area, but it doesn't look as cool as it used to, I guess, right? There's Wrigley's Gum used to be on the right here, and you were able to go inside and get a free stick of gum if you walked to the front door and you say hi to the lady. Be like, here you go. I don't know how often people did that because the Wrigley gum was only like 25 cents a stick of gum. Or you get like 5 pieces in a package, and it's like 25 cents back in the day. Well, there's Amazon there. Amazon replaced Wrigley's Gum Factory. They knocked down the old buildings. And these old buildings would, a lot of the people from the neighborhood, surrounding neighborhoods would work at these buildings. Some farther, but a lot of people from the neighborhood worked in these factories and warehouses. And this neighborhood was made of a bunch of saloons and bars and factories and warehouses and truck outfits. There was an electrical company on 39th Street. There was truck companies, warehouses, saloons, burger joints. There was a bunch of different places for people to work at in the neighborhood. There was delis, candy stores everywhere in the neighborhood. And before my time, from when I lived in the area on Paulina Street, there was a lot more before my time. Best Video used to be on the left right here. That second building on the left used to be called Best Video. That's where you could rent your VHS or beta tapes back in the day, in the probably 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And on the right, there's a studio place where musicians used to record there. There used to be a lot of rock guys hanging out on the corners right there. If you walk past that place in the 80s or 90s, you would see a bunch of long-haired dudes with skinny leather pants on, or jeans, hanging out in front of that place. But there was a lot of stores here, a lot of taverns. They've either been converted into other stores or apartment buildings. People live and have an apartment building where people used to shoot pool and get drunk and fight. Isn't that crazy? And Eno's Tacos was here on the right as well, coming up. Oh, there was a lot of boarding houses here as well before my time. Up until the 50s and 60s, boarding houses were starting to go away, but a lot of the people would come here and work in the stockyards. They stay in those boarding houses. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Yeah, Eno's is up here on the right, well, it used to be. The neighborhood used to have a lot of boarding houses, a lot of whorehouses for the boarding guys, and a lot of saloons for people to come together and hang out and talk about work and talk about life and whatever they did at the time, whatever they talked about. And boarding houses were really common throughout America, especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It peaked with where at that time, late 19th century, early 20th century, either 1/3 or half of the total population had at some point lived in a boarding house in their lifetime. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? And most of the boarding houses were ran by women who were a lot of times widows, and they were already wives, and at one time wives that took care of things at home, so they didn't know how to took care of things and cook and clean and so on and so forth, and so they would have people come and rent the places. But it started to turn in the 20th century. It started to evolve into like slums, and people referred to them as like dirty places where people let strangers in the house, and they started making rules against it, laws against it, where people weren't able to rent rooms to people anymore because it was dangerous for the children to be around those strangers. And a lot of them drank at bars and stuff like that because there were saloons everywhere, And so you don't know who you're putting in your house. I did some other episodes where I talked about boarding houses where some of them killed the landlords and fought with them and stuff like that over dinner. Yeah, it's pretty crazy times, right? But yeah, those boarding houses ain't around anymore. But on Wood Street where we passed up, where I started talking about it, there was a bunch of row houses right there where a lot of the boarders used to live way back in the day, before my time when I lived there. There was people living there, but they weren't boarders. They were just slum type people. But they knocked those buildings down. And up here on Damen, there used to be a bridge right here. If I kept going straight right here, there would be a bridge that went all the way to 47th Street to the back of the yard of the neighborhood. They knocked that bridge down, and there used to be a hill on the left and right side. And on the left side of that hill right there, a bunch of couples used to sit at night and kiss each other. You would see like little groups of people sitting around, and bums would sleep underneath the viaduct. Now we're going down 37th Street. This is 37th Street in the McKinley Park neighborhood. That was McKinley Park we just passed up on the right over there. We're coming up with the Honorary, 37th and Honorary here. Where on the right side here used to be a grocery store, a Polish grocery store called Narożniczkowski. It was in the 1920s, on the right-hand side there. There's a lot of bars and grocery stores everywhere on this area. At one time. And on the left here is a church that I believe my mom and dad got married at in 1976. It's a Lutheran church, St. Andrew's. And I looked up on niche.com to look up this neighborhood and see what statistics they have there and some numbers that they have. And I found they said that McKinley Park is a neighborhood in Chicago, population of 15,443 people in Cook County, Chicago. And it says that the neighborhood's filled with bars, and if they think they got a lot of bars, they don't have no idea what it was like a few decades ago. I didn't see one bar, but there used to be a bar like on every one of these corners here. You can see those weird faces on the corners. Those used to be bars. There used to be bars in the middle of the streets. There used to be delis, all this stuff. They don't have bars like they used to. They're crazy. They said many families live in McKinley Park, and most of them are liberal, it says. Who wrote this? But anyways, it said most of the families are liberal, and they own their house. And let me see where it says the median rent is $1,259, and the median home value is $293,000, and 31% of people rent, and 69% of people own in this neighborhood. So they say. And not counting the guys that live in their basement or on their porch. And I like that niche.com also said that McKinley Park is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Chicago, 14 of 93. And I don't know what they mean by diverse. I think diverse nowadays means less white people, right? But I think it's mostly a Latin neighborhood, mostly of Latin types, right? Venezuelan, Mexican, maybe Cuban, and whatever else, right? And unless they meant diversity as gangs, like there's some people that are in gangs, and there's some people that are not. And then there's some people that used to be in gangs. So that's quite diverse for the neighborhood, I believe, right? And most of the people that I know, I don't think I know one person that lives in a neighborhood that I grew up with, or grew up seeing in the neighborhood. Everybody has moved out. And most people I interview that had lived in the neighborhood, I haven't really talked to anybody, talked to one kid that lived in the neighborhood. But everybody that had lived in the neighborhood, they said they moved out because the crime got crazy in McKinley Park. And I talked to an old Mexican lady that she had a kid that was friends with somebody I knew way back in the day. And she lived on Wood Street. She lived right across the street from some hillbilly friends I had. And yeah, it was pretty interesting. She moved out She moved to some suburb because the crime got so bad in McKinley Park. Well, let's look at the numbers, what they have here on this niche.com website. It says, okay, McKinley Park violent crimes. The assault is 471.4, which I guess is almost double the national average, which is 282.7. Murder is 0. There's another website that says that they're so happy that nobody died in the neighborhood or got killed. So they say, right? And rape is 0. Although I saw something different on another website, but we'll get to that. Robbery is 163.3 in the neighborhood, which the national is 135. So it's just a little over the national average in this neighborhood. And property crime is burglary is 348.9, which the national average is 500.1. Theft is 1,512 compared to a little over 2,000 as the national average. And motor vehicle theft in McKinley Park neighborhood is 348.9 compared to the national average of 284. So yeah, you're more likely to get your car stolen in McKinley Park than anywhere else in the nation. And where else are you more likely? You're more likely to get robbed, I guess, in the street. It says violent crimes. Yeah, robbery, 165.3. So you're more likely to get robbed in McKinley Park than anywhere that has a standard of the national average, right? And you're more likely to get assaulted, more than double likely to get assaulted in McKinley Park than the national average. This site also says it's a nice place for people to come and move and bring their families to. So who would want to bring their family there? It's like, you kids deserve the tough crowd. Yeah. I walk 7 miles to school in the snow, uphill. You could join a gang, child. Don't be scared. Is that what they tell them? 14% of the neighborhood has a master's degree or higher. 18% have a bachelor's degree, and 21% have some college or associate's degree. So there's some smart people here, and then there's a lot of construction workers like myself, right? But as far as the homicides that I was talking about, there was a website 2024 that talked about there was the major crime spike in the neighborhood, but there were 0 homicides recorded in the year in comparison to the year previous. Now this is from McKinley Park News. They said that robberies in McKinley Park of that year more than doubled from 28 to 61, while motor vehicle thefts rose 70%. 70%. And then from 60 to 102. And then burglaries climbed by 32%, from 34 and 22 to 45 and 23. Notably, no neighborhood homicides were recorded in 23 compared to 5 and 22. So this is an article from 24. They also said that overall in the 9th police district, which contains McKinley Park, Brighton Park, Canaryville, Back of the Yards, Bridgeport, and Chinatown neighborhoods, index crime rose 14% in that year. And they even talked back about the year 2020 and with coronavirus and people locking themselves inside. They're saying that the crime was down. Crime went down when people were stuck in their houses. Isn't that wild? People, I think, are still stuck in their houses. They don't go out like they used to anymore. At least in some neighborhoods, right? And they said that there was 3 types of index crimes grew from that point in most of in McKinley Park over the 3 years from 2020 to 2023. Robberies increased 154%. Holy shit, 154%. That's crazy. How does that happen? And then thefts climbed 90%. From 133 in 2020 to 233 in 2023. And burglaries only rose 67% from 2020 to 43 in 2023. Man, it's crazy. Families, they're telling you it's a good place for a family. But there's a lot of websites that say that they give a score on the crime and the overall neighborhoods, giving it an A- or a B-. But it makes me think about like how people are so numb to the effect of crime and happenings in Chicago that they just say, oh, somebody got shot on 35th. Anyways, let's get something to eat. That they hear about it so much and nobody's connected in the neighborhoods like they used to be. So nobody really cares as much anymore, and they hear it so often that they're just numb to the idea of it. But the majority of the people I interviewed recently have almost exclusively moved out because of the crime levels got too high. But it makes me think about like how carpenters, like you ever work next to a carpenter and a carpenter does like a shitty job just to make something work, He's like, what he usually says after that, he says, it looks good from my house. And so like a lot of people, they sit in their house, and not every single person's getting affected by crime every time they walk out of their door. Not every single person experiences it. So they could say, hey, my day was fine. I think crime is down. I haven't been robbed once today. Well, of course, not every single person is going to get robbed, and it's not going to be every single day. But there is crime, and that's why we go by statistics, right? Whatever's reported. Because the neighborhood that's just south of here, which is the Back of the Yards neighborhood, there was an incident with a woman that the police officer told me that one woman got her car stolen, and I went to go see that woman, and then she said her car was stolen just like her sister's car was stolen. And they said, what kind of car did your sister have? She said she had a Prius. A Prius on this street? She's like, yeah, she lives down the street there. And they said, we didn't get a call on a Prius last week. And she says, oh, she didn't report it. And so there's so they find out about the underreported crimes. And he said there was another incident that was further west from there, about a couple miles, which was another woman with children that lived at a house with a porch, and that she kept getting harassed and robbed by the gangbangers. And I believe the Back of the Yards neighborhood, still at that point. And she finally called the police on them, and they didn't like that she called the police on them, so they burned her porch. And I believe her kid was on the porch playing. The kid had to run in the house because the porch was on fire. But they managed to put the fire out, I believe, and nobody got hurt. But it goes to show you, woman, don't snitch on us. Gangs don't like snitchers. So that's one of the reasons why people don't report crimes. And other reasons, maybe just because they said, well, how are they going to find somebody that stole my car? Or how are they going to find somebody that robbed me? He had a hat on and a mustache and boots. How are they going to find him? So they don't report it, right? It's a possibility. And I believe that goes around the whole Chicagoland area, where a lot of people are losing faith in the police because of incidents like that, where they get robbed and nothing comes from it. Like they don't get their money back or whatever they got robbed. I talked to a youth that lived in Back of the Yards, or a little bit west of there. He was giving me the rundown of where all the gangs were in the neighborhood. And I don't remember what he told me because I wasn't really interested in it. And he's like, yeah, these guys are over here and that. But I was like, what do you do around the neighborhood? He's like, I don't go out anymore. I was like, why don't you go out? He's like, well, it's too dangerous. He said it was better back in the day when he was real young. And then when he got older, it got rough again, but it's getting a little better now, but he still doesn't go outside. He just stays home and plays video games. And I talked to people in Garfield Park, the Austin neighborhood, Bronzeville. I talked to a lot of youths and a little bit older people that do not go outside anymore because of the crime. And they're going to call the police, and even if they do call the police, what's going to come of it? The guy's going to go to jail for robbing them if they get their stuff back. And they're like, well, screw it, And so people just don't go outside anymore like they used to. And on the left-hand side there was all these new houses. They all look the same. There used to be a warehouse there. It was a painting factory or warehouse there. That we used to play ball in the streets, and we used to hit the ball off the building. It's gone. Nobody cares about that. But it was just a place that employed people at one time. And you can see that there's a place that used to be a bar or a tavern on the corner there, on the corner of 38th and Hermitage. My cousin used to live on the street over here on the right. And so did a milkman. He used to live on the street too. And my cousin and his friends, they're older than me, when they were kids, they used to skeech the milk truck around this neighborhood. And on this street right here, one of the kids, they were skeeching the milk truck, and one of the kids hit the dry pavement and cracked his head and died on the street here. My buddy Ray used to live there in that building. Yeah, so they delivered milk back in those days, and I think up until the 70s, and coal. And this is also a place where a kid died in the street. And there was candy stores and delis, a candy store in every block. There was a bar in every block. There was funeral homes everywhere for the people that didn't do well at the bar, I guess. And then drugs started to come in the neighborhood around the 70s, 80s, get pretty rough, and then the 90s started getting bad, and then 2000s, forget about it. There's girls from other neighborhoods that I talked to, that I interviewed, that said that nobody goes in her neighborhood, in some women's neighborhoods, they don't go anywhere without guns. So a lot of people walk around with guns in their purse or their pocket or in their car or something like that, or some kind of protection, because it's gotten to that dangerous. I guess they're gonna have a shootout. I don't know. But like that one article said that most of the neighborhood was classified as liberal. I'm guessing in that case there's a lot of crime, and they say, well, boys will be boys, gangs will be gangs. It is what it is. We'll raise a family here. I just thought about that. But I guess your politics, or how you identify, I guess, shows you where your moral compass is, right? I guess that's what they were doing with that. But as far as immigrants or gangs and stuff like that, or this being a Mexican neighborhood, I don't think it has anything particularly to do with gangs, because gangs had been in Chicago for a couple hundred years at this point of today, right? There was Irish gangs, there was Polish gangs, there was so many different gangs throughout every decade, throughout various neighborhoods. There were some neighborhoods that people were told to avoid in the 1890s, early 1900s, and some streets to avoid because of the gang violence way back in the day. So it doesn't have anything to do with race or ethnicity. Although I was reading something earlier from a sociology book that said that in the census of 1910 showed that Mexicans had a higher crime rate of any immigrant group in the United States at that time. And also at that time, the Japanese had one of the lowest crime rates because of their unity and their connection and how they got together in their community and their social statuses and how they bonded and took care of things in their neighborhood. Everybody knew each other, and everybody knew what everybody was getting into, and they pushed everybody to get into one thing or another, whether it was church or school or clubs or organizations or something like that. And so they had a close-knit society to where people didn't really veer off from that type of society. There was a few, but not as many as other societies that didn't have that kind of bond or the unity as some of these Chicago neighborhoods are now, where they're disconnected from family, from culture, from all these different things that people had back in the day. And these were unifying things in neighborhoods and in cities, and that unified people, brought people together so they could talk about things and share interest and morals and have the same moral compass and ideas than somebody not, right? In this particular neighborhood, there was a lot of immigrants at one time, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and so on and so forth, right? A lot of Polish, and one time there was Irish, I think initially Irish, and then Polish, and then Lithuanians, Irish, Lithuanians, and Polish. And they had their own shops, they had their own churches, and everybody got together at all the saloons, and they knew each other's families, and they knew each other's neighbors. They knew the name of your dog. They knew what job you had. And when you went to the candy store, which there was a lot of candy stores there, whether you were buying candy as a kid or if you were an adult buying a cigar, because they sold them there too when you picked up a newspaper, then you would see your buddy Joe that was at the saloon, or you see your other buddy Frankie that worked at the factory, right? That a lot of people knew each other from throughout the neighborhood, through the saloons, through the churches, through the different clubs, different boarding houses, and jobs and everything. And now a lot more people are disconnected. And because of that disconnection, I think that's why crime has spiked a little bit more, because it's not personal anymore. There's a lot of people causing crimes and killings and stuff like that because they don't know anybody anymore. Everybody they know is on Facebook and lives in Texas or Mexico. And that's where their strongest bonds are, and they don't even bond with their neighbors on the same street or the same block or in their neighborhood anymore like they used to. But that's a thing that's been going on for over 100 years now. There's a book called The City by Robert Park and Ernest Burgess. They wrote a book, and they were talking about the decline of society and unity in the early 1900s. I think they wrote the book in like 1925 or something like that. It's a pretty cool book. And it's still relevant today. Like, you can still understand like what they were thinking about, even though at the time the telephone was still relatively new, in the automobile and stuff like that, right? Only a couple decades at that point. But they said the automobile was like one of the first things that was like the destruction of unity, right, and morals and stuff, and like how people just started becoming strangers. You know, the Industrial Revolution was another big thing that brought people off the farms and to work with strangers at factories and get off the farmland and the little neighborhood and go out and find a bunch of strangers, and that's where things become not personal anymore. And then they said that the automobile also took people to look for jobs outside their neighborhood, and the telephone made you stop leaving your house and just call somebody instead of going to visit them anymore. And so these were all things that Robert Park and Ernest Burgess were talking about in their book, from the 1925 City book, which wasn't exactly on Chicago, but does mention Chicago and like other cities as well, America, right? And I think it even brought up some European countries as well. But if you kept going straight down 37th Street there, you would eventually have ran into that hill. And back in the day, in the wintertime, that hill that used to go up over onto the Damen overpass, a lot of kids used to sled down that hill when there was snow, right? And then used to play football in the grass right there right next to the hill. It was a pretty cool place. They tore it down, I don't know why. That's a good way to get to 47th Street. Or maybe they wanted to separate themselves from the back of the yards neighborhood. Who knows? But if you look at a lot of these street corners here, you can see where all the places that used to be taverns. Back in the day, there used to be a lot of people on every corner, standing outside, either smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, or just hanging out in front of the bar, getting some sunshine while they drink their cerveza. That's how it used to be back in the day. And then, like, if you're a little kid and you get in some trouble, and then you run down the street to the local, bar, wherever you see people in the street, somebody there knows your family, and then you'd be saved by the people that are out in the street, because everybody was out in the street at the time. There wasn't that much going on, although there was crime. And the last street that we just came back from, on 36, there was a bar on the corner there. I believe that was one of the last bars in the neighborhood that I know about that was open. The last time I believe I was in that bar, I hooked up with my ex-girlfriend there, Piper, back in some 2005 or so. But they closed that bar down from being so safe. But I'm talking so much that I'm missing all these places. So yeah, the place back there. And there's a bunch of boarding houses around here, a bunch of taverns. Well, they used to be here. A lot of them have been knocked down, and then they built newer places on top of that. But we can't really can't really blame those buildings from getting knocked down and rebuilt to something else. Like Jean M. Twenge said that people just evolve, and like she wrote the book Generation Me, Jean M. Twenge, and she was talking about how that particular generation, the millennials, they were entitled. They felt everybody won an award for even losing, and around this point, people started disconnecting and spending more time on their cell phones and video games instead of going out and hanging out with people. So it wasn't so much the boarding houses getting ripped down and rebuilt to something else. It wasn't maybe the loss of the saloons either. There's a lot of social clubs back in the day too, not as many today as there was then. And I was going to post some historic pictures and videos on top of the streets that I drive through, like I did on some other videos, but it's like this one's gonna be like an hour long. That's gonna take a lot of time. So it's like, you just use your imagination, look it up yourself. But the people nowadays, I don't think it has a lot to do with the boarding house not being there or the buildings getting converted into something else. It does have something to do with the generation, of course. Like Jean M. Twenge said in her book Generation Me, that I read 15 years ago or so, that the generation is a lot different nowadays. They're more entitled, and people don't talk like they used to. They don't go out in the streets. They don't know their neighbors like they used to anymore. They sit on their cell phones, or they sit on their computer games more nowadays than they did before. Let me say something really quick about this corner right here. This Allstate Liquors right there in that corner building right there. We used to go there when we were younger and get alcohol to do whatever we did, hang out, because that's all we did back then, was drink and do things. We had a good time. But before our time, maybe a couple decades before my time in the streets, there was a movie theater down there, or some kind of theater that had a lot of shows and had acts there as well, and a lot of neighborhood people would go to that theater that was to the left of that corner building there. It was called the Midwest Theater. So there was a lot of things to do in this neighborhood, and that's what we did. And then it started getting a little rough and dangerous, right? But like Jean M. Twenge was saying, that people stop going outside as much, not just because of crime, but also because of they're on their cell phone and computer games now. Times have changed as well. This neighborhood had a theater at it, had a liquor store right here, had that restaurant to the right over there that's been open for a long time. And a lot of people on the same block listen to the same radio stations, they watch the same TV shows, and they went on the same streets, went to the same stores, went to the same churches, went to the same schools, and everybody knew each other and talked about the same things because everybody was in the same community. And now everybody travels so far away. They talk to people far away on Facebook. They listen to music that nobody else listens to, and they try to be different just to be different, and not to mend with anybody else in the neighborhood. But there's a lot of theories of why people are moving out of this particular neighborhood, and why there's not many people in the streets as there used to be, and as many businesses as there used to be, and bars and stuff like that. Lots of theories, and I'm just giving a few of them right here. But I talked to a few Latin people that live in this area and surrounding areas, and there's a common thing where a lot of people would say, not all, but a lot of people would say that they live across the street from their grandma, or upstairs from their uncle, or they live with their parents and stuff like that. And a lot of Latin families they have a lot of unity, and they stick together with their culture, and they're proud of being Mexican. They won't call them supremacists or anything like that, and it's not a bad thing, but they have it and they practice it, and so they may be able to afford the rent prices and the house prices, being that everybody's living in the house, and they're able to pitch in on the rent prices and the housing prices. If a guy has 8 or 9 kids, and a couple of them are already working, they're pitching in for the rent and food, and then they got the uncle in the basement that's pitching in, helping with the rent and the food and the taxes, and then they got the cousin upstairs. They're helping paying for all this stuff, and so rent goes up and taxes go up, and they're like, well, we're just gonna have to invite more people or have more kids. No, I'm joking. But in the 1970s, the house prices in this area were around $20,000 or $30,000 back then. Rent was like $100 to $200. 1980s. That's the time that my dad bought a place over there. Actually, on Leavitt Street here. Before that time, it was probably even cheaper than $20,000 approximately. And in the 1980s, it was $100,000 to $130,000. And 1990s, even more. Then the 2000s, then stuff just started going up. 2010s, forget about it. That's why a lot of these kids are probably angry. They can't afford anything. The dollar is, I think it's not so much that things are going up. I think the dollar is just losing value. And sometimes you see a lot of construction workers coming out of these buildings. A group of them, I don't know if they're all living there or not, but they're all probably chipping in for the rent, right? And every dollar counts if they're doing construction in the neighborhood. And then one of these guys finally gets enough money to buy his daughter a new car, and the car gets stolen because the crime is so high over here, and the burglaries are more above average here in this neighborhood, right? So they're trying real hard to pay their rent and their bills, and they buy the daughter a car, and it gets stolen. They're like, damn it. But yeah, this part of the neighborhood of McKinley Park is where a lot of my family originally started living at and hanging out in the streets, right on Leavitt Street there. My Mexican great-grandfather divorced his wife, moved to somewhere on Western, and his son divorced his wife. Well, they moved on Leavitt and then divorced his wife and left her there. And she was there with their 2 kids who got married and moved in with their spouses. And the daughter's husband was from Kentucky, and the son's wife was from Leavitt Street, down the street there. So it's all in the neighborhood. You see that? And then the mother was down there, and the 2 mother-in-laws got along, and they worked together and hung out together and stuff like that, because it was community back then, and everybody lived right down the street from each other. They didn't have to drive 20, 30 miles to go see one another. I think a lot of Latin people are keeping that kind of tradition. In Chicagoland area, of course, because they have a lot of family back in Mexico, of course, right? And are you seeing all these old buildings on the right here? My sister, I believe, used to live in one of these back in the early 80s. I heard they're really nice apartments, really tall ceilings, really cool places, old buildings. And they still exist. And just imagine the amount of families that moved in and out of these buildings here on the right. And these bridges on the left, there was a lot of these bridges. There was the Damen overpass in McKinley Park, and then there was an overpass on Ashland as well that went over 39th Street for some odd reason. Just an overpass. So they didn't have to wait for traffic. Why'd they take that stuff down? We need overpass on every street. I've seen a couple websites in early December 2025 that said that Chicago traffic was one of the worst traffic in the whole world, second to some other country, and maybe the first worst place in America, I believe the article said. So we need more overpass bridges around Chicagoland area like we used to, and the hills that go up on the side of them so kids could go sledding down them. And guys could take their girlfriend at night. Like the sociologist Park and Burgess that wrote that city book, they were talking about, and initially in like the first couple chapters, they talked about how the car was like such a bad thing, breaking families and communities up and causing traffic. And that's driving through this neighborhood or reading that article reminded me of that. That's why I brought it up. But there is more cars on the street than there are people on the sidewalks, that's for sure. But if you go a couple miles north of 26th Street in the summertime in the Mexican neighborhood, sometimes you wonder if there's more people in the streets than there are cars. My dad used to go to that barber shop on the left there in that building. It was called Frank's Barber, if I believe. The guy died, I think, 10 or 15 years ago or so, old guy. And up ahead in the far corner, there used to be a liquor store. And on the left-hand side, there was a billiards, I believe, or some kind of tavern that had pool tables, and people would shoot pool there and have a contest there. So that's where neighborhood people would meet up and shoot pool. But people from this neighborhood also went to other neighborhoods to play pool as well. My dad was shooting pool over there in Little Village, I think on 46th Street or something. There's a billiards where people shoot pool still to this day. And I think it's a Mexican billiards. It's got some kind of Mexican name to it. And then there used to be billiards, or a tavern on 63rd Street, a couple of them that people used to shoot pool at, and they're all over the city. And so they used to go around and shoot pool with each other. And sometimes you would get crime from the people that came from outside neighborhoods. Back of the yards, not Little Village, I meant. Like 69th Street and Marquette Park used to have a lot of bars and pool tables, and it was a quiet, safe neighborhood, but sometimes outsiders would come in and make some noise. Now I'm wondering if everybody in this neighborhood is an outsider. They see each other as outsiders. Like the one guy from my Garfield Park episode where I interviewed him about his neighborhood. He was talking about the people on the next street that he couldn't go to, and he couldn't go to restaurants because of those people at the wrong street. They might be there. And the guy from Austin said the same thing. There's some areas of the neighborhood he couldn't go to, or some streets he couldn't go to. But not like there wasn't any crime. I believe the alley that we just passed up behind us there by Frank's barbershop, I believe I know somebody that got killed there doing a drug deal in that alleyway right there about 15, 20 years ago or so. And by the way, that was McKinley Park on the left there. Now we're heading southwest on Archer Avenue, going away from McKinley Park, the actual park, and leaving the neighborhood too, going westbound, which is a direction I used to have to go to Cruisin' Music that was up there on the left about another mile, around just after California. That's where a lot of people in the neighborhood went to go buy records and tapes before CDs came out, but they did get CDs towards the end. And I'm not sure when Cruisin' Music shut down over there on Archer in California. But that's where we used to go. And coming up on here on the left after the McDonald's, I remember getting a Big Mac from that McDonald's in the 80s, back when Big Macs were big, were decent size. But right after that was a pet store, and that's where I bought a bird. And I was like very young, first grade, second grade, something like that. But I don't know, it probably hadn't always been a pet store. It might have been a restaurant or a saloon back before my time, because on the farther left, in that there's a white building that used to be an old restaurant as well, that used to sell meat that probably got from the back of the yards, or not back of the yards, but in the yards, and they would sell it at that restaurant there on the left, that white building on the corner. And that was like in 1930s and 1940s. That white building was a restaurant, and they served sandwiches, I believe, and very reasonable prices. And the guy was a very nice guy, although he couldn't speak English really well, because I think he was Polish or something like that. But yeah, there was a lot of food in the neighborhood, and if you didn't stop at a sandwich place, you could probably get a hot dog from one of the street carts that were in the neighborhood. There was a street cart on 39th Street there. A guy called his street cart, I think it was called Bozo's. And then there was another guy that always hung around Wood Street on 39th as well. I forget his name though. But there was a lot of hot dog stands around at the time, and there was a few paleta guys, Mexican paleta guys, ice cream Mexican dudes. And but I think there was more hot dog carts more toward Bridgeport, more to the east, in the old McKinley Park neighborhood. Oh, when we passed up a building, I wanted to mention about the CTA place that used to be there, CTA Terminal, the huge building that was there for a long time, across the street from the Dunkin' Donuts, which I don't believe is there anymore either. And then there was another really big building there for bingo, A lot of people would play bingo there. I remember that. My buddy's girlfriend used to go there. That's gone. Community stuff gone. See, yeah, that's what you people need. You need to play bingo to bring the community together. And the supermarket on the left was Butera, I believe, back in the day. That was one of the neighborhood stores. And coming up here on California, that whole strip on the left used to be all stores and apartment buildings upstairs, and the theater a few blocks down. And that's where Cruise and Music was. It was like the third or fourth door down, the record store. And there was a bunch of other stores there, like butcher shops, bakeries, and clothing stores, and all different types of stores on the left-hand side there. They knocked all those buildings down so they could make the school longer, because there was more kids coming into the neighborhood for some reason. Now this left-hand side of the street kind of looks like what it looked like by California and Archer, where they knocked all the buildings down to build a school bigger, Kelly High School. A lot of neighborhood kids went there. It was a rough school. In my time, I think it got even worse. But yeah, all those stores, I think they were even taller. It had taller ceilings, I guess, or maybe 2 apartments on top of the store. I don't know. But this was always a quiet neighborhood over here. Now I heard it gets a little loud over here with gangs. And I talked to one young Mexican dude that becoming a police officer that lives in this neighborhood on the left, or used to live in the neighborhood on the left. And he said that he used to wake up every morning and go to work, or go to work or school or wherever he was going to. And when he come out one of these side streets here on the left, there was always prostitutes out there, Latin prostitutes, and he said he wouldn't have to talk to them. They would come to his car and be like, "Hey, you want to hang out?" or whatever they said to him. He's like, "No, I have to go to school," and he'd take off. He's like, "Man, it was freaky." Because I told him I heard that there was a brothel somewhere in this neighborhood. At least one of them that I heard about through some of the people I talked to. And he said, no, there's prostitutes on the street. He said they might come from the brothel. But it's a little more organized than the brothel, right? When the gangs control it. Anyways, that's my take on the McKinley Park neighborhood. I wanted to point out every bar that shut down and every establishment that shut down, but then I came up with this idea to just talk about sociological events and demographics of, what the prices are and who's living in certain areas and crime and stuff like that. Because who cares about a bar that was on 37th and Honorary or 37th and Walcott, 35th and Wood? Who cares about those bars? But I do talk to a lot of older people that used to live in the neighborhood, and they say that there was no drugs back in the 70s or 80s and prior, and no gangs, nothing like that. But then I talk to other people that say a different story. So I know some people, personally, that were dealing drugs in the 80s, at least, and prior. And most of those guys are dead now, I believe. And they shot up bars, and they dealt drugs, and they fought people in the street. And I even knew a bank robber from this neighborhood, Larry the bricklayer. He died maybe 7 or 8 years ago as well. Yeah, so there was crime in this neighborhood and back in the day. And I don't know if there wasn't enough crime for people to know about. I don't know. But on those streets in McKinley Park area, we used to play ball in the street at night, and everybody was home. All the people were home doing their thing. And you would look down the street, and you would see half the street their car windows were left open in the 80s. I think the 90s it started to change. But the 80s and prior, people used to leave their front doors open to their house and leave their windows in their car open overnight. Nobody locked up like they do these days. Everybody's got like an alarm system on their car nowadays. But in McKinley Park, that's how it used to be. I bet you go down any of these streets at nighttime, you'll not find one car with a window that's open unless it was broken open by somebody. So there was crime in the McKinley Park neighborhood, but not crime like it is today. And there was safety in the back. And there's safety now, but not the same kind of safety that there was in prior generations in the McKinley Park neighborhood. Like I said, we used to play ball and we used to play tag and stuff like that. We used to do a lot of stuff when we were kids. And sometimes we would jump through people's cars as like a joke, like, go ahead and chase me. And then you would jump through somebody's passenger window and drive up, and jump out the driver window. You wouldn't steal anything, but you just jumped through the car because you were a kid and you did stupid shit, right? And so that's what we did. And we were able to do because everybody had their windows open and their front doors open. But I'm not complaining. I moved out of the neighborhood already, so I'm just showing the history. I'm just trying to point out a few places, not all of them, and I'm showing what it looks like now because maybe in 30 or 40 years it's going to become Chinese. Who knows? And it'll look completely different, and they'll etch their name and their language on billboards and front signs in front of the restaurants. Anyways, that's it.